Okay.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah. Hey there. I'm Michael Wayne,
I'm
and
Anna Judith.
we're today looking at visionary in the future again, looking at healthcare and health, healthy living for the 21st century. And health is such an important topic always, in these coronavirus times, perhaps even more, but always big topic. Um, we'll be somewhat U.S. centric here because of the U.S. healthcare system and how dysfunctional it is, but our talk about health and wellness is universal. So, Anna, do you want to make any have any introductory comments before we?
Yeah, I just want to welcome you all. Michael and I are speaking to you from opposite sides of the country. I'm in California, he's in New York State, and we've both been working in the field of health most of our lives. Michael's an acupuncturist and integrative medicine doctor. I'm a psychologist, somatic-based psychologist, body-based therapist. I teach about chakras and energy and yoga, and I did therapy for 20 years till I gave that up for all of my travels. But certainly I've been in the health field. And so we're going to look at the history of medicine and how we got to sort of the situation we're in right now. We're going to look at the healthcare system, and we're going to go from there into the future as to what could be a better system and how we can better take care of our health and what the future of health might look like. So feel free to type in or raise your hand and ask questions. To raise your hand, you just go to the participant screen and you'll find your name up above the chat box, and you can there's a little button down in the lower right-hand part of that, actually midway down, that says raise hand. That's if you want to speak on video, and we are recording this. And we're really glad you're here for this discussion.
Yeah, and I'll just add that, thank you, Anadea. I want to just add the famous quote from Thomas Edison. I read it last week when we did this webinar last week. But it's a famous quote. People come across it all the time, and it is truly said by Thomas Edison. It's not one of those memes that was said by somebody else. But Thomas Edison's quote is, "The doctor of the future will give no medicine, but will interest his patients in the care of the human frame, in diet, and in the cause and prevention of disease." So that's the ultimate healthcare system we all want to go towards. And there's a lot to overcome, but I think many of us are aware of the proper way to achieve health. Okay.
Yeah, so I'm going to start this time, and I'm going to take you on a little tour of the history of medicine to give perspective. It's always good to look at the past before you go to the future. Those who don't look at history are destined to repeat it, right? So we want to just kind of look at the progression and how we got here. So I'm going to share my screen here. And, the history of medicine, you could say in many ways, is a fight between life and death. We want to stave off death, but we also want to stave off illness and live as well as we can. Obviously, if we go way back, let's see. It's not forwarding because, let me see.
Yeah, go into full screen. There you go.
There we go. Full screen now, okay.
Yeah.
So obviously if we go way back, then the first health practices were shamanistic, that shamans who worked with nature and spirit, they felt like something was out of alignment between the person and the community, or between the person and spirit, and they did dances and chants and herbs and various magical type of things. And it was men and women who were seen as the shamanic healers. And just interesting enough, other than being herbalists and midwives, we didn't have the first woman physician again until 1849. So there was a long gap where women were excised from the field of healing. Now, the next, oldest one that we know of is Chinese medicine, goes back 5,000 years, right, Michael?
At least.
Yeah. And it's an energy-based medicine, but it treats the whole person and, you know, looks at body, mind, and spirit, a series of meridians, organ meridians, balancing the elements of yin and yang, the elements of fire, earth, metal, water, and wood. It was a very holistic system, again, that treated the whole person. We also found a very holistic treatment in Ayurveda from India. The golden age of that was 800 BC to 1000 in the Common Era, but Ayurveda is having a big resurgence now because of the whole field of yoga. So yoga is interested in everything Indian, and they're looking at Sanskrit, and they're looking at Ayurvedic medicine. So that's having a whole resurgence. They were one of the first to have a materia medica that they wrote out and work with herbs and diet. They had some limited knowledge of anatomy, but it was mostly the bones. And here's why. It was not accepted or even allowed to dissect a body after it died. You know, the dead body was sacred and was thrown in the Ganges for soak for 7 days. But after it had soaked for 7 days, they could dissect it. Well, by that time, all the flesh had pretty much rotted, so all they could do was look at the bones. So it's just interesting what the cultures do and how, you know, it affects our knowledge of something. And they did have some simple surgeries. They could remove tumors and whatnot. So that was a very strong, and it's, you know, Ayurveda and Chinese medicine together are also having a coupling for a lot of people working together in that. We go back to the Code of Hammurabi, 18th century BC, and they said, if a doctor in opening an abscess shall kill the patient, his hands shall be cut off. Pretty, you know, we think malpractice is a big deal now, but that's a pretty heavy thing. And interesting, you know, a little tidbit I found when I researched that if the patient was a slave, then the doctor didn't get his hands cut off. He just had to replace the slave. So you can see that that kind of attitude has been with us for a long time. And Herodotus, one of the great historians of Greece, he said that everybody in Babylonia was a physician, because what they did is they laid the sick in the street and the passersby would come by and offer advice. Kind of interesting. Oh, I'm sick. What are you going to do? And, you know, I don't know whether they gave them herbs or alms or prayers or whatever. The prognosis was the divination from the liver of a sacrificed animal. Exactly how they did that, I do not know. But then we come a little more toward the modern, but still before Common Era. Hippocrates started saying that some of illness was food and our occupation and climate, and that our natures are the physicians of our diseases. So, you know, what did he mean by that? That it was our attitudes that had a lot to do with whether we got sick or not. He advocated natural cures as much as possible, paying attention to diet, use of very few drugs. And from Hippocrates, of course, we get the famous Hippocratic oath that doctors still take today to first do no harm. And there's much more to it than that. And also in the ancient Greeks, there was Asclepius, the god of healing. And the temples to him were these beautiful, beautiful places out in the country. And what you did is you went out there and you stayed the night and you slept. And apparently in the sleep, you were going to get a healing dream that told you about how to heal yourself. And that was what people went for. I think rest is always a good thing for healing anyway. The first medical schools and hospitals were around 300 BCE in Alexandria, the tip of Egypt. Alexandria was just the ancient center of knowledge in the ancient world. It had the famous Alexandrian libraries. This was the beginnings of systematic physiological study, but it was burned and looted 48 BC, 40,000 scrolls, not only of anatomy and medicine, but mythology and everything that the ancient world had learned by then. This was like the central library. It's like losing the internet today, that was mostly burned and looted and lost. The Roman Empire built the first hospitals, the first gymnasiums, realizing that exercise was an important part of health, public baths, so people could be clean. It was also a very big social area. And then when we come into Christianity, the attitudes were that disease was a punishment for sin. So if you were sick, you were punished for in some way. And it's interesting. I grew up in a family that was Christian Scientists, and they didn't believe it was punishment for sin, but that it meant you were off somewhere in your relationship to the divine, in your relationship to what, in Chinese we might call the Tao, the healthy balance and flow of things, that you're off a little bit and your illness comes out of that. And so if disease was a punishment for sin, then health came through prayer and repentance, turning around. St. Benedict of Nursia even forbade the study of medicine, made that illegal or punished, and only prayer was allowed. No dissection was allowed because the human body was sacred and they couldn't look at it. And it was left to cults of saints to perform miracles. Probably some of them did. Probably some of them didn't. Salerno, Italy brought us our first modern medical school, but their attitude there, wise attitude today, used 3 physicians. First, Dr. Quiet, get quiet and take some rest. Next, Dr. Merriman, which I assume means, lift your mood. We know laughter is a great medicine. And then Dr. Diet, pay attention to what you eat and clean up your diet. Then we come into the Renaissance, and from there into the Enlightenment period, which was the discovery of science and the spread of the printed word. Human dissection was finally allowed because this was all in the realm of scientific inquiry. In the 1700s, from alchemy went to the study of actual chemistry, and Paracelsus started recommending chemical drugs in place of natural herbs and plants. Of course, this is the time we had Descartes come along, René Descartes, who said, looked at the body as a machine. Body and mind were very separate. The mind was the ghost in the machine, and that the body was this mechanical set of parts and completely separated from mind, from our psychology, from our emotions. I don't know what their attitude was toward diet, and with this, surgeries were on the rise. It was regulated, it was licensed. And from that, in this discovery of science and wanting to look at everything, Leeuwenhoek, the Dutch guy that created the microscope, and we had the first germ theory. With the microscope, we could discover bacteria, we could discover what was causing infections, and develop, medicines to basically go against the bacteria. Oh, it's not any of these other things. It's not your diet. It's not the way you live. It's not your attitude. It's that you have a bacteria. So if we kill the bacteria, you'll be well. And with this discovery, a lot of the old ways of healing got pushed into the underground, got pushed into, the realm of what we call quackery and not taken seriously anymore. 1928 was the discovery of penicillin, and by the 1950s, antibiotics were very widely used. And, this is both good and bad that we have these drugs to treat bacterial infections. I mean, before this discovery, doctors didn't even wash their hands very well before they cut open a woman to give her a cesarean birth, and women died from infections. I'm told even the doctors were very resistant at first when they were told they had to sterilize. I said, well, who are you to tell doctors what to do? And, the good side of this also is immunology, vaccinations. Of course, there's a big argument about that today, but we pretty much erased smallpox and yellow fever and polio and, serious diseases like that. And this also led to the whole vitamin revolution of the 20th century. But along with this, discovery of germ theory and that overtaking the old forms of medical practice is the whole pharmaceutical industry. And in 2001, that was worth $390 billion. In 2019, just 18 years later, it had gone up to 1.25 trillion, of which oncology, pharmaceuticals for cancer is almost $1 trillion of that, 99.5 billion. They have some of the highest profit margins of any industry, up to 40%. More pharmaceutical countries are in the US than anywhere else, 6 out of 10. They developed about 7,000 drugs, and it costs quite a bit to develop a drug for all the research and approval. And they do a lot of advertising, 26 billion in advertising. And we see that all the time, followed by, do not take this if you have high blood pressure, if you have headaches, if you, we see those ads where they rapidly speak all these side effects. They're even marketing antidepressants to children. And, we've really become a very drug culture. Along with this, in modern medicine, iatrogenic deaths, and that means deaths that occur largely in hospitals due to unnecessary surgeries, due to catching an infection in a hospital, like a staph infection, to the negative effects of drugs, or being given the wrong drugs, or being given too many, or just having a unexpected side effect of drug. These are deaths that occur that are the third leading cause of death after heart disease and cancer. And it was said to be 250,000 a year. Now, right now with COVID in this country, we're about 130,000 deaths, I think, which is horrible. But, and we're just a little past halfway through the year. It could be about the same as these iatrogenic deaths when the year is said and done for. As much as we should be up in arms about preventing the spread of COVID, we're not talking about these iatrogenic deaths very much, but it's just as many people. Of course, we also in the modern day have lots of chronic illnesses. And, when I was a kid, I don't remember so much, parents and other people around me having chronic illnesses, but these days it seems everybody's got something. In America, 45% have chronic diseases. That's 133 million. The top three are arthritis, cardiovascular disease, and cancer. Over 65% of people have chronic pain, 20% in general. 1 out of 5 people suffer from some kind of chronic physical pain. When you come into psychological health, 40 million people over 18 have anxiety. Wish I had some statistics on under 18, because there's a lot of anxiety in teenagers and preteens now these days. 16 million people have had a major depression in the last few years, and it's a leading cause of disability and suicide as well. And just compare the US to some other countries in that depression and anxiety, 1 in 5. Worldwide, it's only 1 in 13. But still, 1 in 13 is pretty high for anxiety and depression. And worldwide, 1 million suicides each year. So what are we doing with our health? Where have we been going that we have chronic illnesses, we have a drug industry, that we have more anxiety and depression, more suicide? Does it have anything to do with how we live? Well, let's look at life expectancy over the years. We think of, as we have more modern, means of medicine and treatment, that life expectancy gets longer. And for the most part, it has. In 1900, it was only 39 years, the average life expectancy. I was quite surprised it was so low. I thought maybe, if you go back 200 or 300 years, it might be that. In 2014, it had nearly doubled to 78.9 years, average life expectancy. But for the first time in the modern era, life expectancy has actually decreased since 2016, interesting, that's when Trump took office, to 78.6 years. And that may seem like 0.3 years, a third of a year, that's not much. But when you take an average, that's a pretty significant number. A lot of that has been due not to illness so much, but guns and suicide and drug overdoses. Now, when we look at life expectancy, there's a lot of research about our telomeres. Telomeres are part of the cell, have to do with the DNA, and they are supposed to be long. And as you get older, they get shorter and shorter. And the shorter they get, the less they are able to properly transmit the DNA as cells replicate. Well, the idea is that if you can keep your telomeres long or make them longer, you will actually live longer. And they've been doing experiments. They've got mice and they've worked their telomeres to live 24% longer. In lower animals, they've managed to extend the lifespan like 6 times. And they think it's just a matter of time before we can start doing this on humans. So what if we live to be 200 years? Wouldn't that be a game changer for how we look at climate change, how we look at, you know, the things we do, the way we work, our families and all of that? I mean, if we could stay young and healthy and fit. So when we look at living longer, and even today, you know, when I look at my friends who are mostly my age in their late 60s, early 70s, you know, we don't look like people used to look at that age. You know, we're much more lively and healthy and fit than certainly my parents' generation was when I was, you know, looking at them in their 60s and 70s. So, you know, there's more emphasis on keeping fit, on health is more than just the absence of disease, but health as a kind of vitality, as a kind of thriving in our bodies. And in that, you know, there's a whole science of biohacking that I'm going to get to in a moment. But if we live to be 200, we really have to take care of the health of our environment, because if we're living in places with bad air, or the water is not clean, or, you know, that we have, you know, unexpected consequences on our health. And no matter what we do, if we're exposed to this, people get cancer from being exposed to toxic waste sites, you know, even when they've taken care of their own health. So we need to look at the health of the society, the health of the economy, the health of our healthcare system. And in terms of our, you know, personal health, you know, biohacking is a new trend. And it is looking at how we can actually hack the biological, psychological, neurological systems of the body to perform better. And some of that is looking at the brain. There's so much study of neurology now and how the brain works. There's a whole market of smart pills that help you with your memory or your focus. There's, you know, brainwave headphones that you can put on that induce meditation states. There's things like Lumosity that are brain gyms, you know, games that you play that increase your ability to reason quickly and remember. There's, you know, this attachment to youth, staying young longer. Well, if we're going to live longer, we want to stay young and healthy longer. So research and use of growth hormones, different amino acids, stem cell therapy that gives you new growth in your joints, for example. Looking at how do we hack our general vitality while using breath work, and of course, much better diet, looking at the gut microbiome. How do we stay in balance with all this? You know, well, yoga, exercise, meditation to keep our bodies in balance. Also, how do we stimulate different systems of the brain? There's a big fad now in microdosing various substances, and people in the tech world are microdosing psychedelic mushrooms and LSD, and they're also finding they can microdose nicotine, not by smoking, which has, you know, tar and saltpeter that gets into your lungs, but apparently, I've never done it, the little tiny bits of nicotine stimulate your brain and give you sort of a wake up. We don't know the long-term effects of this. This is new stuff. Obviously, you know, working with vitamins, there's some research that says, you know, changing temperature, the brain, body-brain interface that keeps, you know, that if it leaks, then it allows toxins to get into your brain, that subjecting your head to cold, like a cold rinse after a hot shower will increase that resistance. And then also working with all kinds of beliefs about our health, sound healing, affirmations, the role of love and touch in your health. People are having sex longer and more of it than they used to, going on adventure, also paying a lot of attention to sleep and to our routines. And these are all trends for the future to take our health beyond the absence of disease into a really new kind of human that can thrive for many more years in, you know, be vibrantly healthy, strong, awake, intelligent, and that is some of it, what we've done through the ages. So if we just take a really quick review, back in 2000 BC, they said, you're sick, eat this root. 1,000 years later, that root is heathen. Here, say this prayer. Or 2,000 years later, 1850, that prayer is superstition. Drink this potion. 1940, that potion is snake oil. Swallow this pill. And now the pill's ineffective. You need surgery. We need to cut that out. And 2000, that surgery is harmful. Eat this root. We're coming back to the root. And now 2020, root out disease. Go to the root of the whole issue of health. Get fit, biohack, live longer, live better, live fuller, live healthier. And so that leaves us to the future. What does radiant health really mean? And how do we make sure everyone has access to the healthcare they need and the means of becoming more alive, more healthy, and more balanced? And with that, I turn it over to you, Michael.
Oh, well, thank you, Anna. That was great. I enjoyed watching it the second time, even more. Well, I enjoyed it just as much. And it's interesting. It's, that slide at the end, eat this root, all that, kind of showing that we've come full circle in many ways. The early days of medicine, as he traced it, was more what has been called vitalistic, and is medicine as the Enlightenment era came and the scientific method came, and medicine became, especially over the last century, more scientific. Vitalism was bad. It's seen as something, oh, we have to root that out. But that's kind of rooting out the soul of medicine, because ultimately medicine is a healing art. When you take away the art, all you have is technical. So we need to return the vitalistic, and many people are tuned into that. So I'm going to also do a slideshow. So my slideshow is going to be part looking at our medical system, half of it looking at our medical system, and then the other half looking at where we can go, talking about wellness, solutions, longevity. So we'll go two ways with this, and they'll feed into each other. So this was an op-ed back in April. America can afford, so I'll be talking about the US-centric a little bit with the healthcare system. America can afford a world-class health system. Why don't we have one? This op-ed was written by the economists Ann Case and Angus Deaton, who wrote a book that came out in March, Deaths of Despair and the Future of Capitalism, when Anna Day was talking about the life expectancy going down. And you talked about suicides and drugs. It's because of what's called the deaths of despair. So yeah, America can afford a outstanding healthcare system, and we have a terrible one, and we're seeing the results going on with COVID. And it generates wealth for the already wealthy. So it's kind of just like everything in the American capitalist system, it just brings more wealth to some, and by extracting it from the bottom. The healthcare statistics in America are abominable. We spend the most money, healthcare spending in the US in 2019, $3.6 trillion, and we have the worst health outcomes. And in Anadea's slide, she showed 133 million Americans have chronic disease. The statistic I came up with, 230 million Americans have chronic disease. Somewhere in between the answer lies, but it's still a very large number. And of that chronic disease, autoimmune disease, which is really what is at the root of the COVID health illness response, it triggers the immune system in a terrible way. And even without COVID, there's such autoimmune issues in this country. And there's even a book, The Autoimmune Epidemic. And then going on, 37 million Americans with chronic lung disease, 121 million Americans heart disease, 30 million Americans chronic liver, 80 million liver disease, 10 million immunocompromised, 100 million Americans diabetes or pre-diabetes, 40% of Americans are obese. So with the coronavirus, the main people who were at risk were, as doctors and scientists were seeing, obesity, diabetes, immunocompromised. That's what was happening. And over the years that I've been in practice, working in my field of medicine, acupuncture, Chinese medicine, integrative medicine, I've often wondered, looking at people coming to see me over years, saying to myself, this is a ticking time bomb that's going on in America with all the people who are sick. People were coming to me to get better, and some were, but I was seeing a sliver of the population of people going to see of people searching medical care. And so this is the time bomb that's gone off. And prescription drug expenditures in the US in 2019, 360 billion, and per capita Americans take 12 medications each. That's crazy. I've seen young people on 12 medications. I've seen it with my own eyes. The CDC put out information about COVID-19 and who is at risk. They talked about people 65, this is a few months old, people 65 years or older, mainly because people 65 years or older are not in good health. Anna Day talked about her friend. She's hanging out with the right people. And Anna Day, but it's our society is, people of that age bracket generally are declining health, people in nursing home. And again, people with underlying medical conditions, lung disease, heart conditions, immunocompromised, obesity, diabetes, and so on. Unfortunate. Then, not too long ago, the German magazine Der Spiegel had a interview with the same economists, Angus Deaton and Ann Case, and they talked about, and it was called "What's Wrong with America?" This is from Europe looking at America, looking westward. They called it "Despair Smoldering in Society," and the reason I showed this slide is because Angus Deaton and Ann Case, who wrote that op-ed in the New York Times I showed the slide before, said that they believe the healthcare system is partly to blame for the despair that's smoldering in society, and the coronavirus is highlighting the broader dangers American society is facing. Again, we're seeing it. It's really unfortunate. And it ties in then with wealth inequality, income inequality, as the wealthiest have grown fantastically rich. This is a montage of articles that were in, the top 3 were in the New York Times over the last month or two about the insanity of the American medical system in terms of costs. This one's talking about 2 friends in Texas tested for coronavirus. One paid $199. The other was billed for $6,400, and it was because the person who paid $199 paid out of pocket. The other, with their bill for $6,400, was what went to the insurance. But the article went on to say after the dust settled, this person with a $6,400 bill had to pay about $1,000. So they would have been better off just paying out of pocket. This is a story about a woman who survived the coronavirus, and so to add insult to injury, she was given a $400,000 medical bill. Another article about coronavirus costing $100. Should be free. Supposedly it's supposed to be free. It cost about $100, but one person got a bill for $2,300. And then this article, which came from Yahoo Finance, this was, I think, back in January, so before the coronavirus, was just about a professional bicyclist who had a crash, had to be taken by ambulance to a hospital. And even though he had insurance, and as he said in the article, very good insurance, he ended up with $250,000 in medical debt. That was insane.
Medical debt is one of the major causes of bankruptcies, as I understand.
Right. Yeah, and that's people who are insured with the medical debt. Yeah, there's a lot of people doing GoFundMe campaigns to raise money to help pay their medical expenses, mainly because their co-pays, deductibles, can end up bankrupting them with their owed. Then health and economic costs of chronic diseases. This is something that came out of the CDC, and there's a specific reason why I wanted to show this slide. In this, they talked about, the CDC talked about 90% of the nation's $3.5 trillion in healthcare expenditures that's what the cost is. And then they're on this webpage, they went on to list all the different chronic diseases, cancer, heart disease, diabetes, arthritis, and the cost for each one. And then what I thought was very eye-opening was, then they listed risk factors. And yeah, we'll all agree, cigarette smoking, lack of movement, excessive alcohol use. And that's all they put as risk factors. I'm not cutting anything out of this. There's something missing, and that's food, diet. But they will not say anything about it. On the right here, I have a quote. I added this quote on the slide from Michael Pollan. Michael Pollan, great critic of the food system, written many really best-selling books, The Omnivore's Dilemma, In Defense of Food. This quote came from In Defense of Food. And in Defense of Food, he differentiated between real food and what he called edible food-like substances, which is what the supermarkets are packed with. So he said that at the same time, the types of food that can be made from all that subsidized corn and soy, feedlot meat, and processed foods of all kinds bear a large measure of responsibility for the steep rise in healthcare costs. A substantial portion of what we spend on healthcare in this country goes to treat chronic diseases linked to diet. And yet the CDC says nothing about food. And there's a reason, and that's because the big food companies, the companies Big Ag, Big Food, and they're all vertically integrated and with large subsidies, they have a revolving door relationship with the federal government, with the FDA, and they help set food policy. So they are the ones responsible for making sure that food never gets criticized. Some of you may remember the famous case when Oprah Winfrey had her show, and she had on a man by the name of Howard Lyman, who used to be a cattleman in Montana and became vegan. And he had written a book, I think it was called Confessions of a Vegan Cowboy or something. And he started on her show disparaging the meat industry. And so the Cattlemen's Association sued Oprah Winfrey and went to court over this because of Howard Lyman talking about the meat industry. Oprah Winfrey won her case. She met Dr. Phil because of that trial. He was an expert in finding the right jury selection. But anyway, so that's why there's nothing about food on this list. It's always about nutrients. Oh, eat more vitamin C, eat more vitamin D, but nothing about, hey, these foods are really rich in it. This slide is a woman by the name of Marcia Angel, a physician, best-selling author. She was the first woman to serve as editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine. She currently teaches at Harvard Medical School, and she's a fierce critic of Western medicine. She said a lot of things. You can look up her name, find a lot of quotes. I just took 3 of them. One is, in economic terms, healthcare is a highly successful industry, profitable, growing, and virtually recession-proof, but it's a massive burden on the rest of the economy. That goes without saying. Here's a quote about the pharmaceutical industry. The pharmaceutical industry likes to depict itself as a research-based industry as the source of innovative drugs. Nothing could be further from the truth. This is their incredible PR and their nerve. And she should know, serving as the editor of, at one time, the New England Journal of Medicine. And just as an aside, I'll tell you a story. The Journal of the American Medical Association began at the very beginning of the 20th century. And it was a very crooked operation. Their job was to wipe out the quacks, all the quacks, the competition. And the person who was the first editor of the Journal of the American Medical Association, his name is, I think, Doc Martens. And I may be getting it wrong, but Doc was his name. And he got his degree from a diploma mill. And one of the things they did was they would endorse drugs in the Journal of the American Medical Association. They did no testing. They just said randomly, hey, let's endorse this drug. And what they did was as it became ready for publication, they did insider trading. He did, and the people on the inside of the new Journal of the American Medical Association bought stock because they knew the stock price was going to go up because they were endorsing it. So it's just basically a Ponzi scheme that they were doing. So anyway, a little aside. And then last quote from Martha Angell, famous quote is that we certainly are in a healthcare crisis. If we had set out to design the worst system that we could imagine, we couldn't have imagined one as bad as we have. That's something being said from someone who stood at a very high level in Western medicine. She saw it, as I said, from the inside out. So now I want to switch gears and start talking about the positives. Health, real health. This was an article that appeared in another op-ed in the New York Times on June 22nd, written by a cardiologist. And he was talking about the fact that because of the coronavirus, people had stopped going to their doctor. And he said, most seem just fine. People have stopped going to the doctor, most seem just fine. And then his question was, and this is what he wrote about, do Americans really need the amount of treatment that our healthcare system is used to providing? The answer is hell no. It's been said anywhere from like 20 to 30% of what Western medicine offers is important, especially emergency medicine, life-saving medicine, but a lot of it is redundant, a lot of tests, a lot of it to protect themselves, protect from litigation, and a lot of it is because most doctors don't really know a thing about wellness and health. They're not trained to understand nutrition or anything that's health-oriented. So Anadea brought up Chinese medicine as she was talking about history of medicine and talked about Chinese medicine is perhaps 5,000 years old. It's shrouded in legend. The first book in Chinese medicine was the Yellow Emperor's Classic of Medicine, written 2,000 or so years ago. And in the book, it talked about people get sick when they lose the way, when they forget how to live in balance, and live in harmony with nature and with the seasons. Chinese medicine, I'm biased here, full disclosure, that's what I work in, practice in, but it's a very wise system of medicine. And I've come across so many fascinating things over the years working in the field. A friend of mine, kind of a mentor friend, a famous man in the field of Chinese medicine, Leon Hammer, who's in his upper 90s and now has an acupuncture school in Florida, and he used to live in my area, and he used to summer in my area, so we got to be friends. I'd go visit him and talk, and he told me the story of his interest. And Leon Hammer was famous for what was known as pulse diagnosis in Chinese medicine. So Leon told me how he got introduced to pulse medicine. He was a psychiatrist by trade, and he became interested in Chinese medicine, wanted to learn more, and so he had an intermediary introduce him to a man named John Shen, who is a doctor of Chinese medicine who lived in New York in Chinatown and was a master of pulse diagnosis. So Leon went to meet him. The friend, the intermediary, came with him. They went into John Shen's apartment, and when they walked in, John Shen was talking to someone in the living room, and they stood in a different room, and they waited. And then that person left, and John Shen came to talk to them. And Leon told me the story, and John Shen said that he checked the man's pulses and told the man, and this was in the 1970s when Leon Hammer went to visit John Shen. So he told the man that during World War II, this man that John Shen was talking to, and John Shen discovered this from feeling his pulse, was in the Foreign Legion and shot and killed somebody. And that was his health problems were related to that. So let's talk about the vitalism of medicine, traditional medicines. That's fascinating. And there's a lot of stories in that. And you can't really scoff it off because it's a lot, this is really true. In fact, one other story, A man who came to see me for acupuncture told me that he once, there was an elderly Chinese doctor who had come from China for like a month or two, was in New York City to practice Chinese medicine. He took his girlfriend to see this doctor, and this doctor was of an ancient generation that would not touch a woman, so would not feel a person's pulse. But what he did was he had the woman hold a rope, and then he took the other end of the rope, this Chinese doctor, and held it to his ear. And from there, he made his diagnosis through rope diagnosis. And anyway, fascinating stories. Ultimately, Chinese medicine is based on the Tao, the system, the harmony of opposites, and the Tao that creates the 10,000 things. The Tao, so you call it the Tao of medicine. Chinese medicine is the Tao of medicine, and it's really about the science and art of longevity, living a long life. Anna Day asked the question, what would it be like if we lived to be 200 years old? That's a great question. We don't have a lot of longevity practices here in the West, US and the Western world. But there is one organization that has really focused on longevity, a Western organization. It's called the Blue Zones. The Blue Zones started from a National Geographic science writer who started studying certain areas of the world where people live long and vital lives, and so that they had a higher level of people, nonagenarians, centenarians, 90s and 100s. And he identified 5 different areas: Okinawa, Japan, Icaria, Greece, Sardinia, Italy, Nicoya, Costa Rica, and Loma Linda, California. All these areas where people live longer than the standard. And in the Blue Zones, they found the common denominators, the secrets to living a long and healthy life. And they found it to be active, move in natural ways, eat less, eating a whole foods, plant-based diet. They called it, for some, especially the Greek in Italy, a Mediterranean diet, but it was just whole foods, plant-based diet. They found that people drank fermented drinks, wine, beer, in very low numbers. And then also the people had a sense of purpose. They had time to unwind, decompression time, and they relaxed. They took it slow. They had a sense of the sacred, a spiritual belief and a spiritual practice. They had a community, family, a connection to people, and they were surrounded by like-minded people. So all the people, just like Anna Dea talking about her, the people she knows, like-minded people who don't look like the people used to look like at that age. Then a few years ago, I wrote an article about a famous doctor in Japan who is called the Doctor of Long Life. His name was Shigeaki Hinohara, and I say was because a couple of years ago, he finally passed away at the age of 105. And when I wrote about him, he was 98. And so he had secrets of how to live a long life. And I'll just tell you a few of them. He said, energy comes from feeling good, not necessarily just from eating well or sleeping a lot. He said, there is no need ever to retire, but if one must, it should be a lot later than 65. Share what you know. To stay healthy, always take the stairs and carry your own stuff. All people who live long share one thing in common: none are obese. And then he had an interesting one. He said, my inspiration is Robert Browning's poem, Ap Vogler. And it is, he said, my father used to read it to me. It encourages us to make big art, not small scribbles. It says to try to draw a circle so huge that there's no way we can finish it while we're alive. All we see is an arch. The rest is beyond our vision, but it's there in the distance. So in other words, have a big dream, have a big vision. Don't think small, think big. Visioneer and visioneer the future. And just a couple other things. He said, pain is mysterious and having fun is the best way to forget it. Don't be crazy about amassing material things. And find a role model and aim to achieve even more than they could ever do. That's Dr. Shigeaki Kinohara. And how do we change this healthcare system? American, and even goes for other countries, take the profit of healthcare by changing the system to a single payer one with optional private insurance for people who want more bells and whistles. Single payer system needs to cover all practitioners and healthcare providers, make medical school, especially an American medical school, easier to get into, and make medical school free, or at least lower the cost of physicians don't come out of school deep in debt, 300,000, 500,000 in debt. This is the European model of making medical school easier to get into and making it free or low cost. And that's one of the reasons why Western medicine is practiced in Europe is so different than the American model. Hospitals should become integrated medical facilities, having all practitioners available, make it illegal for the big food companies to have lobbyists, stop food companies from setting public policy, have a U.S. Department of Organic Foods within the Department of Agriculture, stop drug advertising on TV. That's when the use of drugs shot through the roof exponentially. And teach wellness in school right from the get-go with kids, nutrition, yoga, tai chi, meditation, stress management, etc. And so I want to just leave you with a little music video I made a few years back. I had written a book called The Low Density Lifestyle. And so I made a video, the top 10 ways to live a long life. Some of the people in the video are no longer with us, but you'll recognize the song, and I think it's fun to end this way. So here we go.
Now, when I get older, closing my eyes, many years from now, will you still be sending me a Valentine, birthday greeting, bottle of wine? If I've been out till like 2:45, will you lock the door? Or will you still need me? Will you when I'm 64? Jealous? Believe me, I can be handy at mending a fuse when your lights are gone. You could make a sweater by the fireside. Sunday morning, go for a ride. God, digging the weeds. Who could ask for more? Who indeed? Will you still need me, or will you still feed me when I'm 64? Every summer weekend with a cottage in the Isle of Wight. If it's not too dear, we shall spring and say, oh, never stop. Grandchildren on the knees. Oh, yes, yes. Oh, check. Oh, day. Oh, do go on. Send me a postcard, drop me a line, straight up point of view. Indicate precisely what you mean to say. You don't know. You're sincerely wasting away. Give me your answer, fill in a form, mine forevermore. Will you still need me? Will you still feed me when I'm 64? Oh.
And there we go. So, yeah, we covered a lot of ground between your slideshow and my slideshow on the day. So,
yeah, and they dovetail into each other quite well. One thing that I wanted to throw in, I was muted, I didn't realize it, but when you're talking about diet, most people I know that go to medical school, maybe it's starting to change now, but they go all the way through their, 8 years of training, and they have nothing on diet in their training.
Oh yeah, I don't think it's changed much at all. Um, I think medical students may be more open to things now, but they're just so busy with their work. I mean, doctoring, they don't have the time, and the economic model is just terrible. I mean, most doctors are not happy with it, but they don't have a lot of time. And a lot
And the
of
work life of doctors isn't very healthy either. Many of them do, 16 or 24-hour shifts, or they see so many patients in order to make enough money to pay off their medical debt, their school debt, that they spend an average of 5 to 7 minutes per patient. You can't hardly find out what's going on. And they get exhausted by seeing, 30, 40 patients in a day. And it's just there's no sense of health in the system at all. So,
yeah, and that's why. Yeah, and that's why I was saying one of the solutions is making medical school free or low cost, like in Europe, so that they're not coming out deep in debt and then having to go crazy with that economic model. And furthermore, we don't just, there's so many really good healthcare practitioners of different stripes. So, a lot of people are tuned in to taking care of their health, and they want someone, whoever the provider is, to be a partner in their health, not a passive. They don't want to be a passive. They don't want to just submit to the doctor, the healthcare provider, to take care of them. That's a big sea change in how healthcare is being delivered.
You can also use the internet to do research on disease and drugs and things like that we didn't used to be able to do. People just trusted their physician. Well, they know best because they have all this training. But now if you are diagnosed with something, you can look it up online. You can look up probably, 17 different treatments for it. You can study the side effects of the drugs you've been prescribed and find out what they are, what research has been done on it. We have more ability to be our own physician in that way. And maybe not replacing, there's certainly a place for medical doctors and healers and all that, but the more we can take care of our own health, I think the better. But one of the things is, when we talk about healthcare, the big question that always comes up is, well, how are we going to pay for it? And one thing that we're not questioning is how health treatments are getting more and more expensive, jacking up the, and especially end of life treatments, because people haven't taken care of their health, and prolonging life when people, aren't, they're in a vegetative state or whatever. That takes an enormous amount of money. And there's many more economical ways to treat health if we start at the beginning, like you say, start in kindergarten with diet and exercise and yoga and Tai Chi and meditation and things like that. Then we don't have these big bills at the end of life.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. About 20 years ago, I was at a function in New York City, in Manhattan. And there was a man there who was an ambassador, a diplomat from Cuba at this gathering. And we got to talking. I told him the work I do. And he said, oh, in Cuba, it's actually known to have a very enlightened healthcare system. And he said in Cuba, because of the embargo, especially after the Soviet Union dissolved, because the Soviet Union was a big sponsor, helped subsidize Cuba. When that money went away, Cuba had to start to figure out how they could keep going. They lost their big sponsor. And so one of the things in the hospitals, they brought in Chinese doctors into the hospitals in Cuba, and the Chinese doctors started practicing Chinese medicine, acupuncture, and teaching the Cuban doctors. And they made it truly an integrative system, healthcare system, and it kept people much healthier. So they were able to do a lot more with less resources. So going to what you were saying, Aditya, there's no reason whatsoever to have this bloated healthcare system, $3.6 trillion that gets spent, more than I think about 7 other countries, developed countries, healthcare budgets combined. And I see it all the time, and I just always just, sometimes it makes me sad, sometimes it makes me angry. I try to empower people to understand things better. Sometimes I'm just kind of their navigator through it. And even that, I don't have the time to take people by the hand and go home with them, but
Yeah.
but there's so many tools now for people to educate themselves. So that really.
So let's open this up to any comments or questions or a little bit of discussion if people are up for that. How does this land on you? Maybe some of you work in health, in the world of health in some way. We have one comment from Deborah. Really appreciate both of you presenting this information in such an engaging way. Yes, let's embrace our own health authority. Exit International is a wonderful resource for end-of-life authority to rest with individuals. I think we know the reason for the bloat, greed. Yeah, greed's a big part of it.
That's in one word, in a nutshell.
Yeah.
You know, we've in these series of webinars we've done, Anna Day and I, we talk about economics and democracy. Greed is kind of the prevailing way, and especially in the American approach, and in other countries too. But America is the bloatist, the Jabba the Hutt country, Jabba the Hutt of countries.
Yeah, yeah. Stephen Hawking said he thought the downfall of humanity would be ignorance and greed. Or stupidity and greed, I think were his words, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Deborah added, it's killing habitat for humans and all living beings. So you can type into the chat. You can also raise your hand if you have a comment that you want to make.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Deborah, talking about the greed, killing habitat for humans, because that killing the habitat for humans, it's being pointed out, is one of the reasons for this novel virus that's spreading as we take away natural lands that were forests and natural habitat. It's breeding, it's creating, opening a Pandora's box, a chemistry experiment that's that's going awry, and really need to address it.
Well, there's, suspicion, or I guess they're proving it now, that the coronavirus came out of the wet market in China, where they're selling wild animals that were alive in cages who normally don't have contact with humans at all. And that, there's other diseases. Some say Lyme disease jumped from, the forest into humans that shouldn't have been having contact. So as we take away more of the natural environment, as we, do more domestication of animals or wild animals and bring them into human environment, we have this contamination that we shouldn't have, and it's creating all kinds of diseases.
And then as we've talked about, factory farming, which is where 98% of the meat that's eaten in the United States comes from, is also another place where viruses can spread. All those animals crowded together. It's just a breeding ground, and these animals are shot up with antibiotics and steroids, and it's just a breeding ground. So really, many of us are awake, and it's time to take that woke consciousness and more so really address it. I read an interview the other day with a scientist and writer, Jared Diamond. Jared Diamond won a Pulitzer Prize for his book, I think 20 years ago, Guns, Germs, and Steel. Then he wrote another, and then over the years, he's written other books. About 15 years ago, he wrote a book called Collapse, about why ancient civilizations collapsed. Now he has a new book out called Upheaval, and he's looking at more modern societies and how they were able to overcome the possibility of collapse and upheaval. And in the interview, he talked about the four big factors that we need to address are nuclear warfare, nuclear disarmament, climate change, living sustainably, and then he also mentioned inequality, wealth, income, even racial inequality. But these are things, if the warning signs are here more than ever before. So
Thank you, Carolyn. Yes, Carolyn has to go, and I know you're from Melbourne, Australia. We're talking a
Uh,
lot about American healthcare systems, but yes.
yeah, thank you, Carolyn.
Deborah says, many of us know someone in factory farming. We need universal income as a bridge to the new world where community and compassion and habitat can flourish. Yes, we pretty much heartily agree. When we did our talks on economics, we talked a lot about UBI, or universal basic income, and that would be such a game changer in health, in inequality, in environmental preservation, in so many areas.
Yeah, and actually, on a day I was thinking perhaps at a later time we could do a dedicated webinar to UBI. And we touched on, as you said, we touched on economics. I thought of a title, something like Universal Basic Income and the Future of Work, because many people, universal income has many, as Deborah says, and you said on a day, community and compassion, habitat can flourish, and it's really can also, the future of work can help us start saying, what is the nature, kind of gets into big philosophical questions. What is the nature of living? Why am I at wage labor jobs and not pursuing whatever it is that is perhaps is my passion, whether part-time, full-time, and always it comes down to money and you have to work. But UBI, though not an income perhaps that people can live off of, but for a good foundation. So, well, thank you, Deborah. I'm glad you like my thinking. And yeah, it's a compelling topic. It's really important. There's a lot of books with it. Dr. Sintopia asked, do either of you live with like-minded people? I do, and I travel in that kind of tribe community. And, don't want to say I live in a bubble, but bubble certain ways, but I'm very perceptive what's going on. So I guess it's conscious choice. And then a day what you do.
Yeah, and I think I'm surrounded by like-minded people as well. I live in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, which is, a hotbed of innovation and people who are very forward-thinking, very progressive. Is probably more healthcare people per capita than most places, whether it's massage therapists or energy healers or doctors or herbalists or whatever, where I am. So there's really an awful lot of alternative. It's easy to think that, if I'm surrounded by that everybody's like that. But I do, or at least before COVID, I traveled quite a bit. And I would go to airports and go, oh, this is what it looks like when you're 70 and you've never done yoga. And this is, and I watch the people lining up for their Coca-Cola and their French fries and their hamburgers, and looking at their bodies and, just seeing the difference. And, health is just such a big fundamental thing. And so many people take it for granted until it fails. And then it's too late. And there's so many things that we have to look at ahead of time. It's just like climate change. And even the COVID is such practice. Rachel Maddow was saying last night, well, we haven't done the prevention that we could. And now it's just this thing that we can't stop. Well, that's the same thing with climate change, and our health is, so much of it needs to be preventative because it's so much more expensive and difficult to heal afterwards.
Yeah, I hear they say an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one thing about Lyme disease, because I happen to have suffered with it a lot in my life, having gotten it twice, and the first time was undiagnosed for 5 years. I didn't know what was wrong with me. And so I've, been very active in the Lyme community and the Lyme research. And one interesting thing about Lyme is it is just not very responsive in the long term to allopathic medicine. And antibiotics are the typical prescription. And if you catch it really early, antibiotics can help, or they can keep it at bay, but they actually drive it deeper into your body. So when you go off the antibiotics, you get a flare up, then you go back on, and then people, reduce their immune system because of the antibiotics. But the reason I bring it up is because I've watched the whole Lyme world, and now it's like 400 to 500,000 people a year get Lyme. Many don't even know it. Because of the failure of the allopathic, many old systems, radionics and rife machines and electronic things and herbs and many other things are coming back into favor because of people's desperation. They go to the regular doctors and it doesn't work. And they go to acupuncturists and they go, oh, well, this is actually healing me more. So it's giving a resurgence to a lot of these other healing techniques, healing modalities. And most people that get over Lyme, and I'm happy to say I'm over it at this point, did a combination of things. I must have done about everything there is in the book. And finally, some combination of things worked. But it is bringing a much more holistic and alternative realm of medicine into play.
Yeah, and there's also a connection or a strong interrelationship between health, physical health, emotional health, spiritual health, the way we think, the way we can vision, and the way our ability to just put forth a positive future. I think the healthier people are, the more their outlook on life is just more positive. And our consciousness evolves and expands the healthier we are, and allows us to dream large, big things. So,
well, we're coming to 15 minutes after the hour, and unless there's any other questions, we should wrap up. So last time to raise your hand or write a question in the chat box. And doesn't look like anything's coming, so I think we should probably wrap it up.
Okay, well, thank you everyone once again for coming, attending, being part of this. It's we're continuing to visioneer the future. So for all of you, we hope to see you again. If you're not on my email list and would like to, it's mwayne2, number 2 at mac.com, mac.com, mwayne2 at mac.com. I'll put you on the list to hear about more. I think most of you are on my list or on Adea's list already. So great. So
I'm at AdeaJudith.com, and I have Monday morning chakra tune-ups for 9 to 9:30 Pacific time. So that class has just started this last Monday, but you can still get in on it if you want some health energetic tune-ups to just enhance your health chakra by chakra.
Great way to definitely enhance the health. Monday morning. Yeah.
All right.
All right. So until next time, everyone, the recording will be sent out later. And oh, one other thing, next Tuesday, a week from today, 3 p.m. Eastern, I'm doing the interview conversation with David K. Johnson, the Pulitzer Prize winning writer. It was supposed to be a few weeks ago. Technical problems stopped it, but we're doing it for sure next week. I'll have an email out with the Zoom link for that. Okay.
Should be a good one. All right. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.